Welcome back. Time now for our daily debate here on France 24. Now, today, the leaders of the world's two biggest economies, the US President Donald Trump and the Chinese President Xi Jinping, are meeting for the first time at Trump's Mar-a-Lago retreat in Florida. Well, looking ahead to their meeting, the Republican president tweeted last week that the United States could no longer tolerate massive trade deficits and losses, and that his meeting with President Xi will, and I quote, be a very difficult one. Well, in addition to these economic issues, there are plenty of geopolitical matters for the two men to be discussing as well, not least preventing a crisis with North Korea from spiraling out of control. So what can we expect from these two men whose personalities could not seem more different? And what might they achieve during their summit? Well, in a minute, I'll put that question to our guests. But first, this report by France 24's Alexander Hurst.
China was one of Donald Trump's frequent targets while on the campaign trail.
China, 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 China.
But the summit between Trump and Xi Jinping won't just see two clashing agendas come head-to-head, but also two men with often very different styles. Xi, one of the most powerful Chinese leaders in a generation who has solidified his position in the ruling Communist Party, is reserved and prefers highly scripted politics and diplomacy. Contrast that with Trump's rejection of diplomatic norms and famously unpredictable behavior that often plays out in full public on Twitter. A type of unfiltered internet display not appreciated by the Chinese, who worry that the American president's anger at his poor polling numbers, investigations into his campaign's ties to Russia, and recent failure on healthcare reform could be taken out on them. And at the luxurious Mar-a-Lago, there will certainly be no golf, a game Xi has pressured Communist Party members to stop playing. Yet the two men might also find sympathetic ears in one another. They are both unapologetically nationalist, with little patience for bureaucracy. And Xi heads an authoritarian government, while Trump has expressed admiration for numerous authoritarian rulers. Indeed, Xi has tightened press restrictions, something candidate Trump threatened to do, and like Trump, regularly characterizes unfavorable media coverage as fake news.
Okay, so joining me here in the studio is Alice Ekman, who's the head of China research at the Paris-based think tank Institut Français des Relations Internationales, known by its acronym of IFRI. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Alice. From London, Steve Zhang, who is the director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies. Thank you very much and welcome back. From Washington, Ralph Winnie, the China director at the Eurasian Business Coalition. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, sir. And from Boston, we're joined by Catherine Moon, Professor of Political Science and Wasserman Chair of Asian Studies at Wellesley College and also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for joining us. Let me start by putting this question to you, Alice, since you're here with me in Paris. The stakes, both internationally and domestically, are high. Some media are saying this is a make-or-break summit for both men. Do you think that's an exaggeration?
Well, I certainly think it's a very important visit for Xi Jinping. We have also to bear in mind that from China's perspective, the aim is to build a relation on an equal footing, not just on the content of the visit, but symbolically between personalities. So on Chinese side, I think the fear is that President Xi Jinping might lose face. So it's hard to make sure that he's hosted in the way that he should be hosted. So it's a matter of respect, a matter of face, a matter of gesture. Regarding the content, a lot of both leaders have a lot on their plate. You have trade-related issues. You also have North Korea issue, and all the flashpoints related to tension in the Asia-Pacific region. I'm not sure that the visit will lead to significant outcome, given the divergences of position between China and the US on many of this regional tension. But what is sure is that the let's say symbolic dimension of the visit and the personal relations will play as much as the content of the relation. But I also wanted to add general background to this visit is that relations are tense already, personal relations, since the tweets that were published shortly after Donald Trump's election. One was related to Taiwan, and second was related to South China Sea. 2 points, two very important issues on which both countries diverge completely. On Taiwan issues, the relation is still tense, although Donald Trump seems now to recognize a one-China policy. It's still a hot issue between the two countries. And on the South China Sea, I'm quite sure that the topic might be avoided given the complexity of the issue for this visit.
Indeed. Okay, so they've got lots to talk about, and it is a delicate meeting. And these two personalities, as we were just hearing there, are very different. Let me turn to you, Steve Tang, in London at SOAS. How do you see these two men getting along, given the baggage that exists already in their relationship, in the form of those tweets, in the form of the overall backdrop to these talks that Alice was just describing?
Well, that is the $6 million question. Nobody knows how the two will get on until they actually meet each other. Now, what we do know is that we are dealing with, on the one hand, two prima donnas. And therefore, you have the possibility of them getting on like a house on fire, or equally really cannot stand each other. But having said that, we have to bear in mind that this meeting is extraordinarily important to President Xi Jinping of China. He needs this meeting to be a success. And he would have been briefed to the most minutiae of details about what Mr. Trump is like and what he likes and dislikes. And President Xi would therefore, in a sense, be prepared to be as charming as he could possibly be to Mr. Trump in a ways that will try to disarm President Trump in order to make that personal chemistry work for them.
Okay, let me turn to you, Professor Moon. Do you see these two men getting on like a house on fire, or do you see the opposite scenario given what we know so far?
Xi will be on good behavior. This is really a getting to know each other session. It's a first date. There will be, as your first guest spoke, there will be no major pronouncements. That's my prediction. But it's mostly about getting to know you and also sizing each other up. I think what's very important is that Mr. Xi will be looking to see if Trump is worthy of respect. And Mr. Trump has a higher hurdle to jump than Mr. Xi. Mr. Xi can behave with gravitas, with authority. He could be very presidential. Mr. Trump, as we know, has trouble with that. And I think how Donald Trump behaves will very much influence the personal relationship as well as the national relationships. I think the other thing that will be hanging over these two, at least for the Chinese side, is the issue of THAAD, the very high-tech missile defense system that the U.S. government is quickly installing in South Korea. That has been, in some ways, more of a security threat from the Chinese perspective than any North Korean nuclear missile or even the South China Sea, at least in the immediate run. So right now, the U.S. has a leg up. It has an advantage. It is expediting this system to be in place. The Chinese don't have much leverage, but at the same time, I think he will express displeasure at the least.
Okay, let me turn to Ralph Winnie in Washington. Let me just ask you, are you agreeing, first of all, with what you're hearing? And let me ask you a second part to that question. What do you think Donald Trump wants out of this meeting with the Chinese president? What does he want to achieve?
Well, I think the key objective is whether is whether Trump can leverage trade to restrain North Korea. Trump has been very adamant about the fact that China is a currency manipulator, that American jobs are not able to be competed successfully in China, that American businesses have a very hard time engaging and integrating into the Chinese market. So he's really going to push very hard to ensure that it's a win-win situation on the economic side for both China and the United States. Certainly the issue with North Korea certainly carries a pall over these negotiations because, as the other panelists correctly pointed out, the U.S. is putting in a high-tech missile defense system in South Korea to combat the aggression of North Korea. And Trump is going to really lay it out on the line that China needs to restrain North Korea in order to promote trade and economic relationships between the United States, China, and their neighbors and allies in the South China Sea. But certainly the personal relationship, you cannot look that over. It's going to be key between the two presidents to be able to sit down and have a personal relationship that's going to develop into a professional business-style relationship that will benefit the United States. Both Xi and Trump are very nationalist. And Trump knows he has to appeal to his base. He has to show that he's strong and tough on China. U.S. is not like New Zealand and Australia that have trade surpluses with China. So it's very difficult to sell the ability to have a bilateral trade agreement between China and the United States because there's so much concern over jobs being lost from the United States to China. So Trump has to leverage the North Korean angle to get the Chinese engaged and to ensure that Chinese FDI is able to come into the U.S., that there's transparency and accountability on both sides for American businesses going into China and for Chinese companies that are trying to come into the U.S. Because Trump has said specifically that the U.S. is open for business, and that includes Chinese businesses coming into the U.S. But we all have to play on an equal footing, and right now the U.S. has been at a disadvantage in penetrating the Chinese environment and marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, we talked there a little bit about, this idea of playing to a domestic audience. And of course, both leaders, as you say, have to do that. But let me just stay with you, Ralph Winnie, because Donald Trump hasn't even been in office for 100 days yet. He's had quite a few setbacks, and that's not to be judgmental. It's just to say there have been a few things that I think it's fair to say haven't gone necessarily how he'd like them to have gone in these early days in office. Does that therefore put the pressure on him to make it a necessity that this is a winning summit and he comes out of this looking like he's winning more than perhaps he would otherwise have to do were things going swimmingly back home?
Well, I think he's going to have to develop this close personal relationship with Xi. And he's trying to do that in an informal, intimate environment like Mar-a-Lago provides. Similar to what occurred during the summit between President Abe and Trump. So he's got to lay the groundwork by developing the close personal relationship and at the same time be able to deliver to his constituency back in the U.S. that he's going to be tough on China, that the U.S. is not going to lose jobs going overseas into the Chinese market. At the same time, the North Korean situation casts a pall over this whole negotiations, because China has got to rein North Korea in. There's no question that the U.S. objective is to ensure that the North Koreans don't develop the capability to fire these nuclear weapons into the United States. I'm from Hawaii, and we have already been attacked once by a foreign power, so it's not inconceivable that North Korea is able to fire a missile into Pearl Harbor, say. And so Trump's main objective, I think, is to ensure that the Chinese will stay engaged and to make it known that if they don't, the U.S. will go alone. And in some respects, that may scare China into taking a very aggressive, active approach towards the North Koreans.
Okay.
At the same time, the Chinese don't want instability and unrest occurring in their region. And every time North Korea fires a missile, it generates a lot of unrest and instability, and the lessening of stability and order in the region, which the Chinese want to maintain, is harmed.
All right, I can see Alice here with me in the studio wanting to jump in. You can't see her, Ralph. Alice, what do you want to say?
Yeah, on North Korea, surely the situation is very tense in the Korean peninsula, but I don't expect much outcome on this specific issue during the visit of Xi Jinping. Why? Because there is a blame game between the two countries that has been going on for quite some time. Even before Trump's election under Obama, both countries had a completely diverging position on what to do towards North Korea and who has the ability to pressure North Korea. The US is saying that China could do more to pressure North Korea. China is saying that it's up to the US. Of course, these are talking points. It's a lot of communication going on here. In practice, China seems to have some leverage to pressure North Korea, but still China considers that it's not in its interest to do so at the moment. And China is equally upset at North Korea, but also at South Korea and the US related to THAAD, as some of the previous speakers rightly mentioned. So China is pretty upset against the deployment of THAAD, and we also have to take into consideration this issue in the broader regional context. China today is developing a new regional strategy. China hopes to create a new security architecture in the region that would not be based on any alliance system. We have to guess that, meaning not in any US alliance system. China considers that the US is not legitimate in the region, and China considered that the US is illegitimately deploying THAAD anti-ballistic missile system. Of course, these are diverging positions, and we may disagree with this, but I think it's important to remember the context. Remember what China how China is considering the US presence in the region, and also how has China considered the retreat of the US from the TPP. China considered that this is, to some extent, a proof that the US is retreating for the region, also proof that the US does not have a clear-cut strategy in the region, and China considered that the time is now in its own advantage, that it's up to Beijing to accelerate the rhythm of initiatives, and I really